I'd like to start by saying thank you, everyone, for coming. My name is Cody Armstrong, and as you can see today, we're talking about Onshape's essentials and really just getting started in Onshape. For the CAD user's perspective, how do I get to sketches, features, parts, assemblies, and some basic drawings? So really a high-level overview of Onshape, really trying to get you a day in the life of the Onshape user. Trying to imagine what it might be to use Onshape day in and day out. So the Onshape Essentials, as I always say with these webinars, I really encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like. So feel free to type in any questions you'd like into the questions dialog, and you go to webinar panel, and I'll do my best to stop and address them from time to time. If I don't get to your question, stick around. I'll do my best to make sure all the questions are addressed before I end the webinar today. So the Onshape Essentials, let's dig in. Now, there are a few things I like to mention about Onshape in general before we get into the topic of the day. And the first, for those new users out there, is our mission statement. And that is getting everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere. And this includes mobile devices, it includes Chromebooks, Mac, Windows, Linux, Android tablets and phones, iPads, iPhones. So really accessibility from anywhere. So you have the ability to access your CAD data from any device, simply log in and it's there. And it also means working collaboratively. And so if you haven't shared your document yet, I definitely recommend it. There's a big share dialog in the top right. You and your collaborators can work together in real time. You can comment and mark up with our comment capabilities. You have follow mode, all these neat tools that are built in to help people work together. So everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere, that's our goal. Now, some things that also I like to mention about Onshape in general. The first is we do consider ourselves professional 3D CAD. And when you think of that, it's generally parts, assemblies, and drawings, those three major pieces. And we do have all three major pieces of a professional 3D CAD system. In addition to those three major pieces, we have some additional functionality as well, including built-in version control. So unlike a lot of traditional CAD systems, version control is built in. There's not a separate software that you have to manage or install to manage versions in Onshape. So built-in version control, also very important if you're coming from another CAD system, is that we can import and export a lot of the common CAD formats that are out there today. So if you have files in STEP, IGES, Parasolid, SolidWorks, Inventor, Creo, DXF, DWGs, and so on, we can import and we can also export to many of those formats as well. So again, working alongside another CAD system, Onshape works really well. There's a number of benefits to using Onshape, not necessarily as your only CAD tool, but as a companion tool to whatever CAD system you're using today. So we can import and export a lot of the common CAD formats that are out there. Think STEP, IGES, Parasolid, SolidWorks, DXFs, and so on. Also introduced with Onshape is entirely new methods of collaboration. Because of the cloud architecture, we can do some really unique things. Things like real-time simultaneous collaborating between users. With a traditional CAD package, that's a file-based thing. One person can open one file at a time. With Onshape, all those limitations go away. So 2 or 3 people can work on the same assembly at the same time. Multiple people can work together on the same part or even work inside the same project. So you don't have the limitations of check in, check out, who has read-write access to the latest version or any of those types of problems, again, because of Onshape's nature. So entirely new methods of collaboration. Again, if you haven't shared your document, I definitely recommend it. There's a big share icon in the top right. You enter their email address, you define their permissions, and you hit share. So it's very simple to do, and you can work together in real time, collaborate in real time. So let's dig into the topic of the day. The goal for today, as I mentioned before, is very much a high-level overview of Onshape. We're going to tour the interface, walk through kind of the critical pieces of the interface, how to get around, and what are the important things that the new user needs to know. Now, the idea behind this is kind of taking you through a day in the life of an Onshape engineer, where I build a simple part, I assemble that part in my assembly, and I create a drawing of that part. So again, very simple. We're going to walk through it, rather quickly, but give you an idea of, going from start to finish. What are all the steps that are involved? And then, of course, the last thing I want to mention, and it's very simple to do in Onshape, is show how to import. So if you do have a library of CAD files or if you're working with another CAD system, I'll show you how to import your data into Onshape. As I mentioned before, again, really encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like, so feel free. There's a questions dialog in your GoToWebinar panel, and I'll do my best to stop and address them from time to time. Okay, so there's one last slide that I have for you, so just bear with me. 5 things. If there are 5 things to take away from this webinar, these would be, I think, the critical points. The first thing is Onshape runs in a browser, so you do not need to install or download or update anything on your desktop. You can access your CAD data from any computer with a modern browser. It does need to be Chrome, Firefox, Safari, or Opera. Internet Explorer is not supported. But any one of those browsers on any number of different operating systems will work fine. So Onshape runs entirely in a browser. Now, a document, that's one of the first things that you'll learn in Onshape, is what's referred to as an Onshape document. You can think of it as a project container. So if I'm designing a bicycle, for instance, the entire bicycle with all the parts can go in one document. So one document can hold as many parts, assemblies, and drawings as you'd like, and it can also hold imported data. So your imported models from your CAD system, or even miscellaneous data like PDFs and spreadsheets. So a document, think of it as a top-level container for your entire project. And that one document can hold as much as you would like. Now, in the document, you have different tabs. I'm going to go over this in just a bit, but each tab has a purpose. So you have tabs for parts, assemblies, drawings, and even the things that you've imported. So different tabs for different elements of working with Onshape. And then you have 2 things that I want to focus on here today, and that is sharing and collaboration are built in, and data management is built in. So you do not need a separate data management system, and you don't need a separate collaboration tool or markup tool or sharing mechanism. So all that functionality is built in. All right, so let's get started. Now, as I mentioned before, we're going to start from scratch here. So just assuming you're just getting started with Onshape, where do I go? How do I get into Onshape? And one of the first things I want to point out is that I'm running on a Mac. You could be running Linux, Chromebooks, Windows. As long as you're using, Chrome, Opera, Firefox, or Safari, you can access Onshape data. Now, the key thing, as I mentioned before, is it runs in the browser. So Onshape is just another tab in your browser. You'll see as I flip tabs here in Chrome, I now have the mountain bike frame up. Okay, and so again, it's just another tab in your browser. There's some neat advantages to that. I can have as many Onshape tabs open as I would like. So a commonly asked question, can I move models around to different monitors? The answer is absolutely. It's just a function of the Chrome browser or your Safari browser. You just disconnect the tab and move it to a different monitor. So you can duplicate tabs, you can pin tabs, you can do all the things that you can do with a browser. And of course, you get the benefit of working with Onshape. So again, just another tab in your browser. The first time you log in, you'll see a link in your email invite to take you to it. But the URL is cad.onshape.com. You log in, and you're taken initially to the documents page. So jumping back here to the documents page, when you first log in, you'll be taken to what's referred to as the documents page. And this is, of course, just a list of your documents. Again, remember that a document is not a single model. A document can be hundreds of parts or assemblies or drawings. So here's a few documents that I have. I have some options I want to point out here on the left. So you have recently opened, which is going to be the default. But you also have my documents created by me, shared with me, documents that have been shared with you. We also have the idea of what we call teams, where I can share with a number of people very easily. But especially important for the new user is the public and tutorials and sample filter. So on the left side, you'll see public and tutorials and samples. And the idea behind these is it's a great resource for those getting started. If you want to see how others would do things, maybe if you're new to CAD and you're trying to understand how someone might model a U-bolt, for example. There's an example of it. And you can open up this model. You can even copy this model and build your own variation of it. But the neat thing about this for new users is that it gives you a step-by-step process of how someone else might do something. So it's a great learning resource. So public models is just a really long list of everything that's been made public by users out there. You can make your models public. By default, they are not. But you can make your documents public. And that makes them accessible to anyone. Now, the other filter here that I'd recommend is the tutorials and samples. So on the left side, you'll see tutorials and samples. It's a great resource. There's videos, there's example models. So if you're just getting started and really want a little bit more specifics on creating a drawing, for example, we have a tutorial on it. definitely recommend checking these out. So those are some important resources when you're getting started, public and tutorials and samples. The last one I want to mention is the trash. Remember, when you initially remove a document, it doesn't get deleted permanently until you empty the trash. So a very important thing to point out. So that's your document list. As I mentioned before, it's really just a list of documents. You also have the filters on the left, which we've covered. Very important bit of the interface is in the top right corner here. We have the create and import. And I mentioned before, I'm going to show you how to import. It's very simple. You select this icon, you browse to the file you'd like to import. So that's really all there is to it. If you have CAD data or anything else you'd like to store in a document, you can import that as a file. So very important key pieces of the interface. You have to create a new document and import document files, or import your own files. The next bit of the interface is, of course, the search, and very simple text search. If I do a search, I get a list of everything with mountain in the name, including my bike frame here. So very simple search. Some other key bits of the interface that I want to point out are on the top right here. So we have the invite friends. If you know of anyone that might enjoy Onshape, or you think you'd like to collaborate with, you can click invite friends, enter their email address, and we send them an invitation to Onshape. Within a few seconds, they can be looking at the model that you are working with you in real time. Also, we have the ability here to share. So whatever document is highlighted, I can click share and then enter their email address and share this with them. So just some neat links, again, to point out from the documents page. You can share and invite your friends. But more importantly, for the new user, these last two in the top right are very important. We have help and your manage account settings. Now, under help, we have, of course, the Onshape help, a great resource for understanding the basics of all the different Onshape functionality. We also have a link to videos and tutorials, the forums, the Onshape forums, a great resource for asking questions and getting feedback. Also a list of our keyboard shortcuts. Another commonly asked question, do you have keyboard shortcuts? Yes, we do, and they can be found here. We cannot customize these yet, but there is a long list of keyboard shortcuts. The last thing I want to mention under help is feedback. Feedback is a built-in mechanism into Onshape that allows you to give us feedback about Onshape, whether it's marking up the screen or just simply giving us some text or just saying, hey, I've noticed this. You can do all of that with the feedback tool, and it's a really neat closed loop system that allows you to send feedback with very little effort on your part. You enter in some simple text. If you want to mark up the screen and send a screenshot, you can, but it's closed loop system. So the moment you hit send, we already know, you're logged in, so we know your login info. We know what browser you're using, so we don't need to ask you any of this information. We automatically create a ticket that's associated with your feedback, and then the emails will notify you of any updates to that ticket. So if it's been updated or it's been resolved, you'll get email notifications. So the idea behind it is we wanted to make feedback very simple. So definitely check it out if you haven't already. The feedback tool is a great way to give us your feedback about Onshape. All right, so almost done with the interface. The last thing I want to mention of the documents page here is the manage account settings. If you go into manage account, you have a number of things, including your emails and your preferences, but most importantly, the units. So under the account settings preferences, you'll see units. And the reason I bring this up is a commonly asked question is, how do I change the default units of all my new documents? And you can do that here. You can also change this on a per document level, but this is a global setting. It changes all the defaults. Or excuse me, it changes the default for everything going forward. So very important thing to point out. The account settings has a lot of stuff that's worth checking out, just because a lot of the different things that you might be interested in, like applications or devices and so on, are listed here. But I'm not going to go through all those now, so we'll jump back. So that is kind of a very quick overview of the documents page. The last little piece to mention, I'm not going to get into too great a detail, is if you haven't already, check out the Onshape App Store. There's a number of apps that allow you to do all kinds of cool things with your Onshape models. So again, not going to spend too much time, just want to point out the icon here in the bottom left where you can go to the App Store. So let's get into actually modeling in Onshape. As I mentioned before, when you first open Onshape, this is what you're going to see, a list of your documents. But if you left click any one of those documents, it'll actually open the document. And this is where you really start doing the work. This is where all the actual work takes place in an Onshape document, is of course when it's open. Real quickly, question. If you're sharing a document with a friend and you're using inches, does your friend shared friend see inches, or do they see a conversion to their preferences? No, they see it in the original units. So it's a very good question. If I create a document in inches and I share it with someone that has a default of metric units, they still see the document in inch units. So the document in that case would prevail because of each inch units. So very good question. Okay, so as I mentioned before, this is really where we get the work done in an Onshape document. There are some key pieces of the interface that I think I want to point out here. Forgive me, I'm going to jump around just a little bit, but I want to start at the top left corner with the Onshape icon. So in the top left corner, you'll see this Onshape icon, and if you left click it, it will close the document, taking you back to the documents page. So it's just a very easy way to get back to the documents page. Moving to the right, we have our document menu. I mentioned before you can change the units of an individual document. You can do that here. You can add properties or metadata to the document here. You can rename, enter descriptions, print, pretty standard general document options. Then we move over to the versions manager, and we have versions and history located here. And I mentioned before that we've eliminated a lot of the pains of traditional CAD, and one of them is save and having to manage files. So if you'll notice in the interface, you won't find a save. What you will find is versions, and within versions, we have individual bits of history. What's important to point out with Onshape is everything you do is saved. And you can restore back to any point, any change that you made, going all the way back to the very beginning of the document. So it's very easy for you to go back and look and see, okay, this is where the mistake happened. Let's restore back to before that point. So it's important to keep in mind there is no save. You don't need to manage files or backups or anything like that. And every step that you take to creating that document is stored in the history. So you can think of really the history as essentially like an infinite undo. Many CAD applications have an undo, but it's 5, 10 steps, or maybe the active session. With Onshape, you have an infinite undo. It goes all the way back to the very beginning. So that is history. You also have the ability to create versions. And versions, think of them as major milestones. A lot of people refer to them as revisions, right? I have revision A, revision B, where the major milestones, maybe these are the things being shipped out to the actual customers. And I want to be able to go back and look at revision A 6 months from now. And that would be a good example of creating a version. So you can capture those major milestones. It captures the design of everything in the document, parts, assemblies, drawings, everything, and allows you to go back and look at it at some point in the future. So versions and history, a key piece to working with Onshape. The important thing I want to point out is there is no save. And so if you're used to Control S, or if you're looking around for save, you won't find one. The neat thing is you really don't have to be overly concerned about messing things up. Right? It's very easy for me to go back. If I've spent an hour and caused all kinds of issues, I can go back an hour, or I can go back a day without having to worry about restoring backups, or having to rebuild the model. So that's versions and history. The next thing I want to point out is creating a version. So we have a simple icon here for, if you click, it creates a version. It just makes it very easy to capture those milestones, those major revisions. Then we have the document name, of course. Now, one thing I want to point out is on the far right here, we have some icons I've already discussed, things like share, which I'm going to show you in a bit, help, and your manage accounts. But we also have comment capabilities. Right. So the neat thing I mentioned before is you can do things like I can right click an edge and say, is this diameter right? So I can mark up, and the user that I'm collaborating with will see the screen and see those things change. So comment capabilities integrated, really neat, especially if you're just looking to track a few notes in your document, or maybe even trying to chat with others in a document, mark up the screen, trying to communicate with someone that's shared in the document. So we have the comment capabilities that are integrated, and then we have the notifications. Okay. So now let's get into some key pieces of the interface. Now, a lot of what I've just shown you is very much administrative for the document, changing settings, viewing the versions, comments, and so on. But how do we really do work? How do we build our assemblies or our features or our drawings? And then we get into start really getting into like the meat of the interface, the toolbar across the top, the feature list here, and so on. Now, a question has come up, what about part numbering? Right now, that's all managed through the Workspace properties. So if you go into your properties, you can create any number of part numbers, descriptions, revisions, and so on as metadata in that document. So you can go in and assign your part numbers through the doc properties. So I mentioned before key pieces of the interface. Probably the most important is the toolbar. Right, of course, across the top, just below what we were just discussing, is the toolbar. The important thing to keep in mind with the toolbar is it changes. This is an assembly toolbar with mates, group options, replicate, all the relations, all the neat things that you can do to test motion out in your assemblies. These are the icons for it. The important thing to point out is they will change. So as I go into a sketch, for example, this toolbar will change to sketch tools. If I'm in a drawing, it will change to drawing tools. So the toolbar will change depending on what you're doing, but this is where you'll access your mates or your sketch features or your revolve, sweeps, and lofts. They'll all be in a toolbar here at the top. Now, some other key pieces of the interface, of course, you have the feature list. Now, if you're new to CAD, you can think of the feature list as going through a history. Every major step or part or feature that you've inserted into this is listed here. Every key piece that builds up this assembly, for example, or the part will be listed here. If you've come from a traditional CAD system, this is very familiar. It's going to be very similar to what you're used to. In this case, this is an assembly. I have a list of all the parts in the assembly and all the mates that hold them together. So feature list, a very key piece to the interface. Again, you're going to see this in your parts and assemblies. Now, another equally important bit of the interface is the tabs across the bottom. So I mentioned before, one document can hold as much as you'd like. You can have assemblies, you can have parts. So here's a part. If I left click the tab, moving over, I left click another tab. Here's another part, the bike frame. And so I can go through and select each of these individual parts and see them one at a time. I can edit them one at a time. So again, just highlighting the idea that your document, your one document, can have as many parts or assemblies as you would like. It can also hold imported files. So here's, you'll see this is a swing arm that was imported from SolidWorks. So here's the SolidWorks part file. You can also import PDFs. Right? And I can even view the PDFs natively inside of Onshape. So you have the ability to import your CAD data. You can build your own models. Everything can be contained inside of the one document. So another key piece, again, the documents across the bottom, that's where you find your parts, your assemblies, and your drawings. In the far left corner here in the bottom, there are two key pieces. The Select tab, which allows you to select all the different parts or assemblies, each tab. So if you have a long list, that could be very useful. And the Create tab in the bottom left corner. And this is how you create new drawings, new parts, new assemblies in your document. And also import your files into the document. So in the bottom left corner, you'll see that Create tab. So the tabs across the bottom, a very important part of the interface. The last thing I want to mention in the interface is the view cube on the top right here. So we have a standard cube, which allows us to go to things like front, top, left, right, and you can even select the corners as well. Okay, so you have the cube. You can also select the arrows and rotate. Okay. And then you also have just below that render modes. So things like hidden edges visible, for instance, another commonly asked question. So you have hidden edges visible as a display option, or translucent, where you can view the model as translucent. Shaded without edges, shaded with hidden edges removed. We also have curvature visualization if you're really concerned about having smooth curvature in your design. And then, of course, tools like section view and isometric view and so on. So kind of the key pieces that I want to discuss covered. You have of course, the very top, you have your tools that you might change the document with, things like properties and versions and comments and so on. But then we get into the meat of it where we're inserting features with the toolbar, or we're seeing everything listed in the feature list. You also have the view cube where you can rotate the model and set the display modes or render modes. So those are really the critical pieces of the interface when you're working in Onshape. Now, to start, let's say, for instance, I wanted to build a model. I want to build a simple example of this dog bone link. So that's what I'd like to walk through. What I want to do, though, is I want to create a new blank part studio. So I already have this document. I've already got a number of parts in it. I want to create a new part within this document. To do that, I go to the bottom left corner, select Create tab, then choose Create Part Studio. Okay, I want to build a new part. Now, of course, if you're trying to build a new assembly or drawing, you have those options as well. But in my case, I want to create a new part studio. Another question, can we rename the instances or features within the left browser? Yes, the feature list on the left, features can be renamed. If you right-click, probably one of the biggest tips that I have for you today is the right-click menu. You'll see rename. So, all right, so let's jump into this. Now I've started a new part studio, and you'll see this, a new blank part, new tab is added to the document called Part Studio 1. If I right-click, I can rename that to anything I'd like. Okay, so another example of the right-click menu. But more importantly, I'd like to start creating my part. Now, if you've come from a traditional CAD system, a lot of this is going to look familiar. You have an origin, you have a top, front, and right plane to start with. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to start on the front plane. So I'm going to left-click the front plane in the graphics, left-click the sketch icon in the toolbar, and now I'm in a sketch on the front plane. Okay, so again, very easy. Left-click the plane you want to start on. In this case, I'm starting on the front. Left-click the sketch button, and now I'm in a sketch. One last step that's very important here is what's referred to as normal to. So normal to will rotate the sketch plane around, and there are a few ways to do this. You'll see me do it with the N key or the keyboard shortcut N. But also, again, another example of the right-click menu. If you right-click in the graphics, you'll see View Normal to Sketch Plane, and that will rotate the sketch plane around. So now I'm looking normal to. Okay, a very important thing when you're sketching in general. You want to sketch normal to, just as a general best practice. So as I mentioned before, we've started our sketch. We've gone normal to the sketch plane. One thing I wanted to point out is notice the toolbar has changed. So instead of seeing mates and relations or features, I'm seeing sketch tools, lines, arcs, circles, and so on. So just keep in mind that toolbar will change depending on what you're doing. Now, I want to start with a few simple circles, and I'm not going to go through an example of each one of these different tools, but I do want to start with a simple circle. Now, I want to mention, as you're getting started, keep an eye out for drop-down. So you'll see little subtle drop-down arrows. We have two different types of a circle and an ellipse that are located in those drop-downs, for example, or two different types of rectangle. So just keep in mind there are oftentimes variations of a command, and that you can access them from the drop-down. Now, in my case, I want to start with a simple circle, so I'll left-click the circle command. As I move my cursor out, and I move it around the graphics here, you'll start to see these inferences of these lines get woken up. So as I move this horizontal, notice that I get the dotted pattern lines indicating that I'm creating a horizontal constraint to the origin. So you will get that attaching or snapping behavior if you've come from a traditional CAD system, very typical. It allows me to snap it to the origin or snap it to horizontal to the origin. Now, in my case, I want to place this circle on the origin itself. So I move my cursor over it. As soon as I move it over the origin, this may be hard to pick up through the GoToWebinar, but as soon as I move it over the origin, you'll see a little flag appear indicating you're creating a constraint. So again, much like many traditional CAD systems, I won't need to come back and constrain this circle to the origin. It's attaching itself automatically. So as I get that visual cue, okay, you're attaching it to the origin, I can left-click, move my cursor up, down, left, or right. With a circle, it doesn't matter. And then just left-click again. Okay. So 2 left clicks, really the first to locate the center, the second to locate the diameter. Now, another commonly asked question is, can I enter a dimension right after I place it? Can I enter a dimension as I'm creating a circle, for example? And the answer is yes. You'll see a little dialog there. If you enter a value and then hit the enter key, it will constrain the sketch. It will dimension this circle in this case. Okay. But if you don't, if you escape out of the tool, for example, and that's another tip that I have, is once you're done with the circle, you can use the escape key to get out of that command. And it doesn't matter. It could be circle, lines, arcs. The escape key takes you out of the active command. And so now I have this circle that's centered on the origin. Now I want to do this one more time, so I'm going to zoom out just a bit, scroll out just a bit, and I want to draw one more circle horizontal to the last one. And again, notice I'm going to wait for that reference to pop up to the origin. Left click, and now I have my second circle. So we have 2 circles in place, and I want to start to constrain them. Right now I have no idea what size these circles are, how far they are apart, or any of those details. As I mentioned before, you could enter values as you're sketching, and that's a very fast way to do it. But if you don't, you can also come back and dimension them later. Right? So here I have 2 circles. I want to start dimensioning them. I select the dimension tool from the toolbar, left click the circle, move my dimension out to where I want to place it, and left click again. Okay. Enter a value, in this case 25, and notice it scales the entire sketch up to match that value. Okay. So I've got my first dimension placed. Now, I want to place the second dimension, but one thing I want to do before I point that out is notice the color difference. A moment ago, this circle was blue, and this circle on the right is still blue. You're getting visual feedback as to the level of definition. So the circle on the left is fully defined. The circle on the right is underdefined. And one of the best ways to figure out why it's underdefined is to simply left click and drag. So if I left click the circle and drag, I can see that the diameter changes. If I left click the center point, I can see that it's free to move left to right, right? So there's no distance defined between centers. So you get visual feedback. You can drag to manipulate and see why it's underdefined. But the big thing I want to point out with this is it really should be a goal to have every sketch fully defined. Just as a best practice, it makes it very easy to figure out what the intent was, and it also makes it hard to make changes inadvertently. So again, fully defined is going to show up as black. Underdefined is going to show up as blue. I'll select dimension. We'll do that one more time, this time on the right. We'll do a radius of 20. And now I want to define the distance between the center points of the 2 circles. So very similar. I don't need to go to a different dimension tool. I just left click the center point, left click the center point of this circle, and then define the distance, in which case is 85. Okay. So I've built 2 simple circles, nothing very complicated, but I have them defined. What I'd like to do next is draw a rectangle or a few lines that close this contour up, because again, our goal is to build something similar to what we were looking at just a moment ago, right, with the dog bone link. So jumping back here, I want to start with a simple line. Right, I'm going to draw a line from the circle from the circle on the left to the circle on the right. Notice that as I move my cursor over the circle, it highlights, indicating that I am attaching my line to that circle. I can left click, and I have my circle in place. Now what I'd like to, I have my line in place. Now what I'd like to do is mirror this line to the other side. So I have half of this, and I like to mirror it to the other side. So we can mirror sketch entities. A tip is they require construction geometry as a reference. So I'm going to select line and then select construction, which will convert it to construction geometry. And then I just want to draw a line between the 2 center points. This line represents the middle of where I want my mirror to be. Okay. So now we can select the mirror command, select the line I want to mirror about, select the line I want to mirror, and it mirrors it to the other side. Now you may be asking, well, couldn't you have just drawn another line? And the answer is yes, you could have. You could have drawn another line and then added constraints to give it symmetry. But the neat thing about mirror is that is automatically done for you. So as I grab and drag, you'll notice that it maintains symmetry about that center line. Right? So mirroring sketch entities is supported. Again, you could have done that manually. Mirror is just a clean way of doing it. So now I can add a dimension. Right? We'll add a dimension for the distance between lines, and this should be 16. And now we're back to a fully defined sketch. Another question, can we construct an infinite, I assume infinite length construction line? And I believe there's no way to do that. I don't think that's an option in the construction line. You can drag it out to the ends, but of course it's not infinite length. You'd still have to manipulate to change the size. So I think that's going to be a limitation, an infinite length construction line. Okay, so I'm back to a fully defined sketch. Now what I'd like to do is just draw some simple circles. So again, I'll select circle. Now what I'd like is for these circles to be centered inside of our two previous circles. And of course I could come in and left click and do that very easily. I want to deliberately place these circles out of place just to show you how to manually add some constraints. So let's just say you want them to go in here, but you accidentally drew some circles out here. What do? How do I manually get these circles constrained in place? So let's go over creating a few manual constraints. Now, up to this point, all the constraints have been largely done automatically. And you can see all these constraints with the Show Constraints checkbox. So if I check Show Constraints, you'll see all these little flags appear in the sketch. If you need to delete a constraint, you can left-click the flag and hit the Delete key, and that will delete the constraint. But just notice how many of these were automatically created. Again, these are just things that I either snapped to or automatically attached when I was sketching. However, there will be situations where you need to manually constrain, and I want to walk you through that process as well. So let's start with a simple example. I want to make these two circles the same diameter. Okay, so I can left-click each circle. So left-click, no need to hold Control or Shift or anything else, and then just set them to equal. You'll see the constraints on the far right of the toolbar, including this example of equal. And so now if I change the diameter of one circle, they both update. Okay, so a few questions that have popped up. I struggle with using zoom to fit and zoom selection and the right click. The key things with the right click is, in general, you have your zoom to fit option there. The create selection, forgive me if I'm confusing things, is just a bit different. We have a zoom to window, and this will allow you to draw a window and zoom into that window. But that's under the drop-down menu here. If you're looking for a selection, for selecting circles, for instance, we have a selection tool. So forgive me if I'm confusing those two. This is entirely different. It doesn't allow you to select a window and zoom in on it. It's for selecting multiple entities. But yes, right-click in the graphics, zoom to fit will zoom to the area or the geometry that you have in that feature. And then you have zoom to window, which allows you to draw a window and then zoom to that. Okay. But another key thing to keep in mind, I know I've mentioned this just briefly, but zooming in and out with a scroll and then moving the cursor wherever you want to zoom is also a very fast way of getting around. So as I mentioned before, we've added two circles. We've set them to equal. So now if I change the diameter of either, they both update. What I'd like to do next is first dimension one, right? So we'll add a dimension to give one a diameter, let's say of 12. Notice again that they both update. But now I need to locate these circles concentric with these circles. So another example where I need to manually add my constraints. So I left click, and then set them to concentric. Okay. Again, left click, set them to concentric. So that's how you'll manually constrain your sketches. If there's ever a scenario where it doesn't automatically attach the way you'd like, you can go in and add your own constraints. So now we've got a fully defined sketch. I'm ready to move on. Notice that with Onshape, I'm not really concerned about making sure to trim entities out so I have one closed contour or any of those kinds of things. With Onshape, I can extrude the entire sketch, including overlapping contours or any piece of the sketch in the extrude command. So you'll see the extrude command in the top left corner here. I click extrude. We'll rotate the model a bit. Okay. I punch in my depth. I have options to, create a symmetric extrude up to face and up to part and so on. So you have in condition options. Now, a commonly asked question is, where's the cut command? In Onshape, it's simply an option in extrude. So in the extrude, you'll see remove. In sweep and loft and revolve, you'll see remove instead of cut. So there's not a separate icon. But you do have remove, a new, add, and we also have an intersect option, which allows you to if you're familiar with SolidWorks, this is very similar to split side or flip side to cut. So a number of different options that are worth checking out. In this case, I just want a simple extrude, 25 inches, green check OK, and now I have the extrude. Okay. So there's one last thing that I'd like to do to this part. So let's move things around here just a bit, and I'd like to start a sketch on the top plane. Okay. So I'm going to highlight the top plane. Now you can do it from the graphics as I did early on, or you can select the sketch command, or excuse me, the plane in the feature list, and then select the sketch command. So I mentioned before you can left click from the graphics, but you can also select it in the feature list, hit sketch, and start your sketch. Okay. So now what I'd like to do here is just draw a few simple lines. Again, I'm going to use those references to attach horizontal constraints to the origin. And then I'd like to add just a few dimensions. Okay, so add a dimension here of 9. Angle dimension, I don't have to do anything special, just select the two lines. It defaults to angle. Now what I'd like to do is take the geometry I have so far, just these 3 lines, and offset all of them to create a closed loop. And the easy way to do this is with the offset command. Now a tip is if you select offset and just left click a line, you're going to get an offset of just that one line. However, if you select offset, left click and drag, you will get an offset of all the entities, right? In this particular sketch, in this case, the 3 different lines. So I can drag out an offset of all 3 lines, left click, we'll enter 8 as the amount for the offset. And the last thing I have to do here is just close off these contours. Now, another commonly asked question is, well, couldn't you have taken the edge and converted it, or couldn't you have referenced something from the first feature? And the answer is absolutely. We have the use command, often referred to as convert, which allows you to convert existing geometry into sketch features. So, for example, I can select use, mouse over this radius, and actually convert it to a line. Right? So I can convert that silhouette to a sketch line, and it makes it very valuable because now I can attach the end of my sketch to that line. Right? So again, just really trying to drive home the idea of constraining it with proper intent. I'm attaching the ends of these lines to the ends of my part. And the key thing there is use command, which allows me to convert existing features. Okay. So that's it. My sketch is fully defined. Again, we'll do another extrude. But with this one, I want to do a symmetric extrude with intersect as the option. Now, intersect will give me just what the 2 bodies share in common. So let's go to a 25 extrude, intersect. Notice that I'm left with only what the 2 features share. So a really neat option in extrude, revolve, sweeps, and lofts is this intersect, and allows me to create a feature which is the end result of 2 other features and only the geometry they share. So really neat tool. I can hit the green check. and now I have that bent arm shape that we were looking for in our link. Okay. So very simple. And up to this point, if you're familiar with traditional CAD, I'm sure that a lot of this is very similar, right? Creating a sketch, creating features, and so on. We even have tools like fillets and chamfers and shells and patterns and all the things that you'd expect to see. I can select a simple fillet, for example, and let's do a 2-inch fillet, and just select radiuses, edges, and it will automatically radius them. So it's very easy for me to go in and create features, without much effort. Now, up to this point, again, it's been very similar to many traditional CAD applications, so, simple sketches and features, and we wanted to build a familiar environment. Where we really start to differentiate ourselves from many traditional CAD applications is how we manage the data, how we manage how you access it, and how you can share. So one of the key things with Onshape is our ability to share in real time. As I mentioned before, it's very easy to do. You can select the share icon in the top right, and you enter their email address. Right? Now, they do not have to have an Onshape account. So if this person doesn't have an Onshape account, we create one on the fly for them. A very important step, though, is making sure to define their permissions. What kind of permission do you want to give this person? Are they just a viewer where you want them to be able to see it, but nothing else? Remember that by default, when you create a new document, no one can see it. So it isn't until you share it and explicitly say that someone else has permission that they can open up and view the model. So it's really important to define how much control you want to give them. You can give them just the ability to view and comment, or edit and share. So there are some granular controls that you can assign. But that's it. You hit share, and they're able to see the document. Right? They don't have to do anything special. They don't have to install anything. They see it in real time. So if I close, you'll see a little visual cue here in the top right, indicating someone else is in your document. So now we're working in the same document at the same time. And in fact, if you look at the bottom here, you'll see another little visual cue. We're also working on the same part at the same time. And so if the person I've shared with adds a feature, you're going to see the feedback, new feature. You'll see that someone else is creating a new feature in your document. If you've ever used Google Docs, there's a very similar workflow where you get different color cursors indicating someone else doing some other kind of work. And you see everything update in real time. So if a user adds a feature to your part, for instance, a shell, I see it update automatically. Right? If a user goes in and adds a fillet, for example, so I select a few edges here to do a quick fillet. As soon as the feature is created, as soon as the person hits the green check, you instantly see it. So now you'll see instantly those fillets are popping. So you're getting that real-time simultaneous feedback between users, and it can be as many users as you'd like. You have the integrated comment capabilities here as well. So I could right-click a hole, for instance, and add a comment, and say, is this the right diameter? Allowing me to essentially mark up the model. And the neat thing is they'll see a little indication that a comment is added, and they'll see a little cue, showing them what edge you're referring to. So you can communicate back and forth with the comments. You can even see each other's screen in real time with follow mode. So let's say, for instance, I'm not sure which hole he's referring to or which fillet he's referring to. When I shared it with him, I can double click the icon for his social cue, and now you're looking at his screen in real time. So now if I zoom in, I can see that that's the feature he's referring to, or maybe you can point out that this is the fillet that I'm referring to. So the key things I want to point out is, we've built a lot of really neat collaborative tools into Onshape. I definitely recommend sharing. You can do things like the simultaneous editing, or if you just want to use it as a view tool, maybe I want to share drawings with the shop floor so they can view it without having to print them out. All of those use cases can be filled by sharing your document. So that is building a simple part. Now, we don't have a ton of time left. I want to walk through building assemblies, and I've already got a bike frame somewhat assembled here, but what I'd like to do is insert the dog bone link into this assembly and just walk you through creating mates and moving things around in Onshape. So jumping over to the bike frame assembly tab, notice again that the icons are different. So instead of seeing features or sketch tools, I'm seeing the actual mates. And of course, the first icon is insert. So I select insert, we'll choose the dog bone link, and I'll left click to place it out in space. Okay. So I've inserted this dog bone link into my assembly. Some things I want to point out, you can just left click and drag to move the part because there's no constraints, it's free to move. But if you left click on it, you can actually rotate and move along an axis. Right? So if you're looking for a little bit more control over how it moves, you can do that. Now, of course, what we'd like to do here is attach this component to my assembly. And actually, this link goes right at the base of this shock and attaches to the swing arm. And of course, to do that, I need mates. And the key thing I want to point out with our mates is we use a little bit different system of mates than many traditional CAD applications. So, instead of using a combination of 2 or 3 mates to place a part, oftentimes with Onshape, with our mate connector approach, we can take that down to a single mate. And a good example of this is attaching this arm to the base of the shock. This arm needs to sit at the base of the shock, attached to it, but it needs to be able to swivel or rotate. Right? So there is a degree of freedom. And in many situations, that might be in a traditional CAD 2 mates, something aligning the concentricity of the holes, and then something making the faces planar, right? The faces attaching each other. So oftentimes that would be 2 mates in a traditional CAD system. With Onshape, we use a little bit different approach, and the neat thing about it is it simplifies stuff like this. So for example, we have a mate called Revolute. And the way we work in Onshape is we select mate connectors from one point and a mate connector from another point, and we bring them together. So as I zoom in on this link, you'll see as I move my cursor over the part, all these different points appear on the part. And it allows me to easily select the point I want to reference. In this case, I want to attach this point, and I'll rotate the part around. I want to attach that point to this point. Okay, so again, I'm just selecting a point from each part, bringing them together. The key thing is the mate type defines the degrees of freedom. So in this case, I have this Revolute mate, right? And I can hit play and see the degrees of freedom that it has. You also have options to flip the alignment, which will reverse the direction of the mate, built right into it. So just going back real quickly here, my goal with this, let's flip this part around, is to attach this part to the link. And we use a mate connector here, okay, on the face of this part, with a mate connector at the part we want to attach it to. Okay? And it doesn't matter what mate type you choose, really the process is the same. The key thing that I also want to point out is you can see how much movement you have before you accept the mate. So if you hit the play, it will animate the degrees of freedom, showing you that this is free to rotate but not move in any linear direction. You can also test out different mates. So I can say, okay, well, let's look at what a cylindrical mate does. Hit play, and now you'll see it's free to rotate, but it also moves in a linear direction. Right? I can try out a slider mate. Hit play, and you can see it's free to move in a linear direction, but does not rotate. So you can try out all these different mate types. It's a great way to learn what they do. But the neat thing about this is it allows me to simplify it. If I hit the green check, now I have one mate that's attached the arm to the frame and is still allowed to rotate. And again, that may be a combination of mates and many other systems. So let's do that one more time. We're going to select the cylindrical mate. I'll rotate it around. We'll select this face on the link. Again, just selecting a point here and a point where we want to attach it. One thing I want to point out is notice that in the actual mate, it ignores the first mate that we added. It's important to point out with Onshape, we're only solving for the active mate, or the mate that you're currently in. But if you want to see the finished result, you can hit solve, and it will solve for all the mates in the assembly. So a key thing to point out, if you add a mate and it looks off, hit solve and see if it looks correct. Okay. Green check OK, and now we've mated our link to the finished swing arm. Now the key test is, of course, how does it move? Does it move around the way I'd expect? And to do that, we can just left click a part, and I can grab and drag and move it up and down. Okay. And I see I'm getting behavior like I might expect, or the correct emotion that I like to expect. So Again, very simple. The big things with the Onshape mates is we're using a point from one part and a point from another part, bringing them together, and then defining how much movement they have based on the type of mate. Whether it's cylindrical, fasten, revolute. Another example I always like to use is, let's say you're mating a bolt to a hole. With Onshape, that is one fasten mate, where in a traditional CAD system, that may be 2 or 3 mates to get it into the position and not free to spin. So with Onshape, that's one fasten mate. So mate connector is a little bit different approach, but again, if you take the time to get the hang of it, it's definitely a faster approach for assembling. So we have just a few minutes left. I want to just briefly cover drawings, and then we will be done. So moving into our last bit here, of course, the key thing with all of this, I've built my part, I've assembled it to test the motion out, but now I need to send this to the shop floor and actually have it made. And of course, that's going to involve creating a drawing. Now, much like creating a part or an assembly, you can create a drawing in the Create tab in the bottom left corner. So I select Create tab, I see the Create Drawing option, left click, choose my template. Now you have Onshape provided templates if you're just getting started, ANSI and ISO templates, but you can also import DWT files and use those as your templates as well. Now I'm going to choose the ISO A4, hit OK, and now I've inserted a new drawing into my document. You'll see a new tab is created here called Drawing 1. Again, you can right click and rename that. And then I'm prompted with what part do I want to insert and start creating a drawing of. I'll start with the dog bone link, right? And then left click to place the front view. Now I can go back to the standard drawing views and insert a top or a right or an isometric, but you can also do this, with, of course, by projecting views. So I can select projected view, left click, and move my view up to create a top view. Do another one, projected view, left click, create a right view, and then left click also to create a projected view. Okay. So inserting basic views, very simple. We have our view tools. We have things like, of course, your detail views where I draw a circle and create a detail. I have section view tools and so on. Don't have tons of time to get into the specific drawing view tools, but basic drawing view insertion, and then we get into dimensions, and we have a number of different dimension types. So I can select 2-point linear dimensions, for example, and go point, point, left click and place, point, point, left click and place. So it's very easy for me to go through and define all the various dimensions in my drawing. Okay. Things like angular dimensions, diameter dimensions, very easy to create in the drawings. Okay, so a few questions here. Can you print a physical copy at this point on a local printer from the browser? You do have a print option right here, so yes. And it will allow you to print and then specify your printer and actually hit print. So yes, you can print from the Documents menu in the top left corner here. I use this sketch to create items from molding, and I've not progressed to assemblies. I would like to see how I can zoom in to examine the details of locations as a whole. If you're looking to zoom in on a specific feature in your part, scrolling in and out is what I recommend. You scroll in and out to zoom in and out. Now, we do have other tools, like I mentioned, the zoom to window. You could draw a window around your location of holes, and it will zoom into that. So that's another method that you could use to highlight or zoom in on certain things. But in scrolling in and out, remember wherever your cursor is, that's where it zooms in at. So as I scroll in, make sure to move my cursor over the thing I want to zoom in on. Okay, so that is what I had planned. We have a minute left. I'm going to stick around and answer any questions that you have. One last thing real quickly before we end things. Going forward, if you're just trying Onshape out, we really encourage you to try it in your professional work and let us know what you think. Give us your feedback. I've shown you just a moment ago how you can do that using the feedback tool. Really encourage you to try it out in your professional environment and let us know what you think. Also, invite others and share. I've shown you both those icons. It's very easy to do, even if they don't have an Onshape account. We create one on the fly, and you can both be working together in Onshape. the last thing I want to point out here is if you've been using Onshape a while and maybe you're interested in meeting local users, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to help you set up and establish your own user group. So that's what I had planned. Again, I'm going to stick around and answer any questions, so feel free to type them in. But that's it. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.